It's time for your Heli Life giveaway buzzword. Listen up and remember this word because you'll need it to enter for a chance to win exclusive Heli Life gear. Ready? This episode's buzzword is Schider. Visit contest.vertical.helicast.com to enter the buzzword.
What's happening, guys? It's Halsey Schider with the Helicopter Podcast. And today's episode is going to be awesome. It's going to be a little bit different than what you might be familiar with on my show. I'll dive into that in 1 second. But of course, we couldn't do this show without the support of MHM Publishing and the Vertical HeliCASTS platform. In fact, I was connected to our guest, Ken Wylie, through Vertical. So not only do they bring me great guests, but they make this whole thing possible. They put it all together. So I'm just grateful for MHM Publishing and that relationship. If you haven't checked out the Vertical HeliCASTS platform yet, I highly suggest that you do. It's not just my podcast. There's other helicopter-specific podcasts on there. Everything from law enforcement, air medical, rescue, and of course, the Vertical MRO. And to our audience, man, couldn't do it without you. I don't know how many episodes we're in. I think it's like 150 plus episodes now. I've been releasing a new episode every single week, every Tuesday for over 2 years. And I couldn't do that without your guys' support, nor would I do it if I didn't have your support. So really appreciate it. So today's episode is Ken Wylie. Now, Ken does not come with a helicopter background per se. In fact, Ken, I got to apologize. You know, we send out our standard email of what to expect for the podcast. And you were like, hey, there's a lot of helicopter specific stuff here. So not a specific helicopter pilot per se, but an individual that has dedicated his life to kind of understanding human factors, decision making, and then applying that into high risk professions like being an aviator, being a pilot. And so this just seemed like a really neat parlay or kind of a neat tangent to kind of discover and dive in and see how then we can relate it back to helicopter. So Ken, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thanks, Halsey. It's great to be here. I'm excited about our conversation.
This will be really fun. So certified, international certified mountain guide. What does that mean?
The International Federation of Mountain Guides Associations has a series of hurdles to cover to allow individuals to become professional mountain guides and to be able to travel internationally with their clients. And so it's typically around a 7-year process to become a mountain guide. And what's interesting about that is that it's not easy. It's a really difficult process. And the certification covers off rock terrain, alpine terrain, backcountry ski terrain, and alpine terrain. And so each of those disciplines has all of their different challenges associated with them. And so to become an internationally certified mountain guide is kind of the PhD if you're interested in the mountains.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And I think, you know, before we were recording, I was telling you that I had this weird kind of obsession with mountaineering. I love reading books about mountaineering. My other point of that was, as I hate golf. I can't play golf. I can throw my club further than I can hit the ball, but I love watching golf. Like it's the weirdest thing. That said, I do actually want to get into some light mountaineering, nothing crazy, but I do like the idea of being outside and whether it's just an amazing, beautiful hike or actually climbing a mountain. I was telling you about my one experience in mountain climbing. There's two parts of it that I think fascinate me. And I think it's also kind of this fascination that I have with like scuba diving is that there's a lot of parallels to being a mountaineer as there is to being a pilot. So like when I listen to these books, I forget the authors. I'm blanking right now, but I read a book last year, and it was about all these incidents and accidents over the history of climbing K2.
Wow.
And it was really fascinating. And I couldn't help but think the whole time, like, oh my God, this Swiss cheese model, essentially, of what we talk about in aviation all the time, of kind of not just one decision causing an accident, but a series of small bad decisions that lead up to something negative.
Yes.
It was so prevalent in this book. And I think that that's maybe why I connect a little bit with mountaineering, because I feel like there's almost this synergy between being a responsible aviator and being a responsible mountaineer.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's kind of what I gravitate to. And it's just different enough from aviation that it feels like a whole different life, which is really fun to go and experience and kind of live vicariously. So I think that that's kind of why I gravitate. The other thing about mountaineering is I'm guessing that it's a passion that spawns at a very young age. So for me as a helicopter pilot, I think my first word as a young child was, airplane. For me, it was just destined. I was supposed to fly aircraft. As a little kid, I thought, airplanes, and here I am in helicopters. Is that the same for you as a mountaineer, as someone that's into mountaineering and actually had a career in it? Was this like a lifelong passion?
Well, it's interesting that you're drawing the parallel between mountaineering and aviating. The common denominator is the human being, and how we show up to kind of high potential consequence environments is similar across all industries. And I find that piece fascinating. And the other piece about your comment is the passion that we kind of enter into these arenas with. Like I grew up on 43rd Street in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And at the time, 43rd Street was kind of like the second to last block before the mountains. And so it grew up with a mountain view, and the pull was magnetic. And when I was 7, my older brother Daryl took me out to the mountains, myself and my sister, as a Christmas gift, and took us essentially, what was at the time, this is 1972, backcountry skiing. We had some wooden cross-country skis, which I now call misery sticks.
Yeah.
And we headed off into, kind of a summer trail that had snow on it. And
cool.
Put some wax on our skis, and we learned to climb up hills with sticky wax. And I was hooked. That it was a life-changing experience at the age of 7.
That's crazy. I'm actually excited. I just, as of yesterday, received my first touring package. I've never done any ski touring, and I don't plan on doing a ton of backcountry because I haven't done my AVI certification yet. So I'm hoping that maybe in the coming years, as I become more experienced with understanding, avalanche and avalanche mitigation and risk and all those things, then I can venture off into the backcountry here in Bend, Oregon. But yeah, I have it's kind of like a 70-30 setup. So like 70% just alpine downhill, go for it skiing. And then it's, 30% kind of uphill. So this year I'm going to be just doing inbounds uphill, just trying to learn how to kind of do all that. So I have like a hybrid binding. I got a new Solomon ski yesterday. I got new boots. So I'm really excited. I think that's kind of neat. That's my second biggest passion is snow skiing. And so excited to kind of get into that. And I'm very interested, and we'll get there, but I am excited to talk about what we have already both kind of touched on, is this idea of decision-making and being human.
Yes.
Oftentimes I look in the cockpit, and unfortunately, when we read accident reports, there's kind of an argument, right? It's just too easy to blame the pilot. And there's kind of like, oh, everyone just blames the pilot because it's the easy thing to do. But you look at all these accidents and you read through the reports, and man, far often than not in helicopters, it's not the helicopter having a bad day. It's the pilot having a bad day and making a series of poor decisions. And so I'm excited to link that between your life and our life here in the helicopter world. But let's kind of backtrack a little bit. You're also an author.
Yes.
Your book is called Buried.
Yeah.
We just met last week, so I haven't had a chance to check out your book. But I'm excited to. I really am, and I mean that genuinely. I can't say that word. I got to stop saying that word on this podcast because I can never say it. But I'm excited to listen to your book. That's how I consume books on my end. But I'm guessing that title is very much about your experience in being in an avalanche in 2003 at Revelstoke. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you kind of painted this segue of backcountry skiing, because we were at a 1 week experience for our clients. I was working as an assistant or aspirant guide, and the experience was a 1 week backcountry skiing experience. So using a helicopter to get in to the lodge.
Love it.
And then from there touring up to 5 to 8 or more 1,000 vertical feet a day.
Wow.
In powder snow, way out in the backcountry, in conditions that were often not flyable. So very committing from the standpoint of, if there's an injury or a problem, we have to deal with it there. Maybe even spend the night out if we're not able to get back to, kind of the very comfortable lodge that we had. So that's where the avalanche happened back in 2003, and super tragic. Halsey, it was a situation where 13 of 21 people were buried, and only 6 of us survived. So we lost 7 people in that avalanche. And one of the things that I'd never kind of calculated out for myself was that if I was in an avalanche with my clients, I never calculated that I would survive. And so the piece that I was challenged with was, okay, so I was part of the decision-making process that led to this event happening. I was under the snow for 45 minutes, and I was dug out alive. And what was really unsettling was the dichotomy between being happy you survived and then having to kind of manage this whole new reality of, I played a role in this, and I'm responsible for people losing their lives. And so, some of your listeners may be a pilot that has been in a similar experience where, they've had a crash and they survived amazingly, and they needed to kind of carry forward and move on with the new information that they now have. And so that piece was challenging. And probably most critical was the idea that this is about learning. That was the only way that I could make sense of what happened. And it wasn't about moving forward. It wasn't about forgetting about it. It wasn't about any of those things that are really commonly kind of phrases in our lexicon around accidents. I wouldn't call it an accident. I'd call it an incident and a tragedy. But learning then allows us to create. It allows us to create something out of something that is also terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And those two things exist at the same time. There can be something that's terrible in our lives. And if we create out of it, then it's both. It's still terrible, but it's also, you then create this thing, or go through a process of creating this thing that has benefits for not only myself in this case, but the larger community. So there actually becomes something that is produced out of it. And I think that that's a really important element when dealing with events that are, no other way to say it is they can be horrific, right? And so that's what I do, is I actually share what I've learned, because what I realized is that when we review accidents, we really kind of lean towards the technical elements. I was amazed to read the Rogers Commission report for the Space Shuttle Challenger, and there's 47 points on O-rings. and 4 points on kind of the human decision making. And so you're really high resolution when looking at the technical elements of what we do,
Of course.
and very low resolution when we're looking at the human factors. And so I don't think that I was aware enough to realize that when I kind of started on this process. But what I've ended up with is a much, much higher resolution ability to look at how, and everything that I've created relates back to this, tragic event that I experienced 22 years ago.
Well, yeah, I really, appreciate you sharing that. And I'm hoping that we can go a little bit more into the actual event itself, because I'm curious to hear about what you've dissected by looking back. And I'm guessing it's that one event, like you just said, that really kind of set this whole thing in motion for you to understand the human factor side. So I do want to go a little bit deeper, if that's okay.
Oh, that's fine.
On that. And I think it's really cool too, because I think when something bad happens, something tragic, as you say, you have a decision as a human, right? You can handle that grief in multiple directions. A lot of the directions you can go are unhealthy and not great. I was in a really bad car accident back in 2014, and nothing like your story. I was by myself in a car, and it was a freak accident. Really, what it was is I was driving down I-35 in Texas in a Jeep. And it's funny, Ken, one of the leading causes of helicopter accidents is helicopters running into wires. Talk about a human factor, right? And in fact, when you talk to a lot of people that hit wires, they will tell you, I knew the wire was there, right? My good buddy Jackie, who's been on the podcast, flew the same field every day for a whole ag season, knew every wire, and especially the one that he hit. And so it's, interesting that's a leading cause. The funny part for me is I've had a wire strike, but it was in that Jeep that day. I had a construction company knock over a power pole on one side of the road of the highway, and a line came down that stretched across, and it caught me like an arresting cable.
Whoa.
And from there, went head on to the barrier. I rolled 2.5 times, ended up having to get back surgery. I mean, it was a traumatic event for me. And luckily no one got hurt other than myself. But, I kept my life. But even that was an interesting experience, because I just felt very weird for a while. I wasn't quite sure why I survived, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I was glad that I did, but it didn't make sense, like, why am I at the store just doing normal life human stuff again? And so I didn't really do anything great from it, to be honest. But I didn't do anything bad either. There were some coping mechanisms where I think you could go, and I chose to not do that. And it hasn't been something that's affected me, but I definitely understand what you're talking about. I mean, it's just a crazy, big event. But back to your avalanche, curious just to kind of hear about that day and the setup and what it looks like from this actual human factor side of just that whole thing.
Thank you to our sponsor, HeliLadder. Enhance your fall protection and maintenance efficiency with HeliLadder, the industry standard of ladder workstands. The iconic orange MX5 system is fully modular and compatible with countless aircraft models for any type of operation, making you money by preventing accidents and reducing maintenance errors. For a free quote and special discounts, visit heliladder.com. Focus on your work, not your balance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on week 3 of working at this particular operation, and I was fully certified in the rock and alpine portions of my guides ticket, and so I was on the last kind of segment of my apprenticeship as a mountain guide, and I took a job at an operation that when I said yes, I was nervous. I kind of had the kind of intuitive hit, like, ooh, this is gonna, I don't know about this. And so I said yes back in July, and then here it was coming up to December and January, and I was uncomfortable. And so I think that that's an important piece to pay attention to. I think there's an element of information that we get that's kind of beyond description or words, and we call it intuition. And we try to put it in a box, but I think that it's important to kind of keep it out of its box. It's it's a little bit mysterious because we can't quantify it or measure it. I like to think of a mother who, wakes up at 2 a.m. knowing that her son who's traveling in Thailand is in trouble. How the hell does that happen?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's true.
But it's true, and it happens, and we know.
And pilots talk about intuition all the time, right?
Yeah.
So that's very interesting.
It is, and so when we're uncomfortable, it's just information, and it's important to act on that. And so I was on week 3. I'd been up there for a couple of weeks, and kind of getting my feet under me. And interestingly, we're meant to have morning guides meeting, and on this particular, kind of to kind of match the conditions with the terrain and the people that we have. And we didn't have, a proper guides meeting that morning. It was really kind of truncated, and we headed out the door, and I, kind of with just 2 shards of information, we're going to Front Alp and then La Traviata. And those shards of information, I grabbed the run photos, so I kind of have a basic idea of where we're headed. And really kind of dreading the day, dragging my feet. I actually got up that morning and I was like, oh, I think I'm going to give my notice on Friday, and this is Monday, right? Like I wasn't having a good time. It was really kind of a top-down, hierarchical decision-making organization. And I was actually quite frightened. And looking back at it now, Halsey, I would have to say that I was in the flight mode of fight or flight. I just wanted the day to be over. And some of your listeners might relate to operations that kind of are on this trajectory of really kind of pushing the boundaries of and the limits of the equipment and the conditions. That's exactly what this operation was like, in my opinion. And we had 21 people in 2 groups. I was in the apprentice mode. I was in the second group, and we broke all the rules. You're going to be taking an avalanche course this winter coming up, I suspect.
Yep, everyone.
And one of the things you'll learn is that when you have unstable conditions in the snowpack, you want to minimize your exposure. Well, the avalanche danger rating was at considerable that day. And it's, it kind of looks like it's only halfway along the kind of trajectory of conditions, but considerable is it fundamentally means that avalanches are possible, right? And we chose to put 21 people all on the same slope at the same time. So all of our eggs were in one basket, and we were really lucky. There were still 8 people on the surface after the avalanche. Because if all of us were into the snow, it would have been a 21-person disaster. So, and that was just luck. It was luck on where the snow fractured. It was luck. And a little bit more about, we had a break just before heading onto the slope, and we're skinning up. So we have these, stick-on skins on our skis. Our skis are in tour mode, and we're working our way uphill. And we head out onto the lead guide heads out onto the slope. I'm following instructions 50 meters behind. And I stop at the edge of the slope and I look up, and I was sick with dread. And behind me, my client said, I don't like this situation. I said, yeah, neither do I. But then being in fight or flight, I kind of just wanted it to be over because I knew that I believed I didn't have a choice. I actually believed that I must do this thing. And it's interesting, when I dive into other case studies like Deepwater Horizon, for example, people were more afraid of losing their jobs than losing their lives. Like nowhere in this, kind of C-SPAN interviews after the Deepwater Horizon tragedy does anybody ever say, I was afraid of losing my life, so I didn't want to be there. Most people were afraid of losing their jobs. And I think that's the headspace I was in. I was like, well, I have to do this because it's my job. And we don't. Like fully functioning adults, get to make choices about what we do and what we do.
That's true. Easier said than done, though. And I'm just going to interrupt real fast because I have some freshies on my mind here. But
Sure.
first and foremost, a parallel that I'm drawing, and we see this a lot in the helicopter industry, and I've talked about it a lot. So I'm glad that you've mentioned this, is that, you have to trust your gut.
Yes.
And it's very easy, Ken, for young pilots that need the hours to allow themselves to go work for companies that are maybe not the best operators. They don't take safety seriously. They don't have a robust SMS system. Maintenance is maybe a little haphazard. All these things are pretty apparent. You can tell very quickly. And unfortunately, a lot of young pilots make the decision, well, I got to get the hours, I kind of have to be here, and I'm hoping with my voice in this industry, I can continue to tell young pilots that you don't actually have to settle for that. And I'm always encouraging people, specifically through interviews, to make it a two-way street. You should be interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you.
Yes.
And again, I know that's easy now. Here I am, long helicopter career. I could get hired where I want to get hired. I get that there's a little bit of a soapbox that I have that's different than being a new pilot. But there was opportunities that I turned down because I didn't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And so talk is cheap. I've walked away from those opportunities. And I think that that's a really important thing. And you have to sometimes trust that intuition, that gut,
yes.
And make sure that you're evaluating an operator. The other really interesting thing that you just talked about with Deepwater Horizon is this idea of losing your job is the concern, other than losing your life. And that is a reflection, or reminds me of training. Ken, I used to work for a company called Air Evac Life Team. And it's an air medical company. They help provide critical care access to rural communities, essentially, right? We're flying sick people from small towns to bigger towns, or if you get in a car accident, we'll pick you up from a highway. And for the longest time, they were flying what's called a 206 Long Ranger. Great helicopter. I love the Long Ranger. I love flying it. But historically, a helicopter that's susceptible to what we call LTE, loss of tail rotor effectiveness, meaning that if you put the helicopter in a certain azimuth position to the wind, depending on your power, usually happening at high power because you're demanding more torque, you need more anti-torque, you can get LTE, essentially a spinning helicopter. And there was an interesting study done at Air Evac, because they were flying the Long Ranger and they had a lot of spinning helicopters, leading to catastrophic accidents, loss of life. So part of our training was this idea of they figured out that the Long Ranger, you can stop the spin. If you apply full left pedal, theoretically, you should be able to stop the spin. Now you're going to over torque. You're going to over torque to the moon. You're going to damage the helicopter to where it's going to need a full teardown. It's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix, but you're going to stop the spin and you're going to land safely.
Yes.
And what they found in all these simulations is that pilots were too afraid to over torque the helicopter. They didn't want to over torque because in training, we're always told, don't over limit, don't over temp, don't over torque. And so if you would just give that full left pedal, but people are too worried about breaking something and then losing their job,
yes,
let alone you're in this spinning helicopter. So I find that to be an interesting parallel in what you were just saying there. So thank you for letting me tangent and happy to hear more of this story.
Well, you bring up something really important that I just want to touch base on that I'll bring up later, is the ability to fail small, right? So over torquing the machine is about failing small. Crashing the machine is about failing big.
Big time.
Right. And so I was afraid to fail small. I was afraid to lose my job for not, kind of not complying to kind of the program. And so, but that would have been failing small. And, just saying, well, I'm not willing to participate in this. I think that that's so important. And so, but what I did do instead was just said to the guy behind me, well, wait here and I'm going to go check out the snow. And of course, the snow on the surface felt really good. The problem that we were dealing with was deep in the snowpack that kind of went all the way back to November. We had rain in November. We went up the ridge top, and then it froze hard. And then we had all of December snow and all of January snow on top of it. And so it was, what we call a PWL, a persistent weak layer, deep in the snowpack. And of course, I was 2 meters above that. The problem was really deep, and really deep, and I was taking a look at the snow superficially, and I knew it, and I convinced myself that things were fine. I went through a process of intellectualizing, this and intellectualizing that. But what's interesting, Halsey, is that I found myself going faster and faster. I was racing for the top. I wanted this situation to be over, and I was in the tunnel. I forced myself into this decision, and now I was committed.
Yeah, the only way to get out of it is to literally get above it.
Yeah, and so I had said wait with when I say come follow with 3 meter spacing. Well, 3 meter spacing wasn't good enough. And as soon as my whole group was exposed, the snow released, and it released really big. It was a size 3.5, which is, it's enough to kind of take down timber, right? So it was a big avalanche. But interestingly, the injuries to the group were asphyxiation, right? And so we went for a ride down to the valley bottom, and 13 people were buried, and we had 8 people on the surface to deal with the incident. And they had a horrific time. They were digging their friends out, and some of their friends weren't alive. I was dug out close to the end. I was under the snow for 45 minutes, and then brought to a long ranger. And Jerry Richard was the plot pilot, and I was flown out to Revelstoke. A couple of days later, learned it was actually really slow, the information traveling out. I think it was a day and a half later learning that there were 7 fatalities. And terrible, absolutely terrible. And we were fortunate because we just moved to Revelstoke, and we were living in a rental place and building a home. And so our address was the new home. And so all of the vans with satellite dishes on the top were outside the new but vacant home. So yeah, I wasn't all that interested in talking to the media or anything like that. It's really interesting. You just don't have the words, right? You just don't have the words when something like that happens, and people want the story, but it's going to be garbled.
Well, especially when it's so fresh like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's and that's kind of the, something that I don't love about the media. There's a lot of things I don't love, but that's one of the things where it's they need the immediate story, right? And they do it at the cost of the victims' families, in this case, a survivor, someone who's just trying to process it themselves. That's difficult. It's something that you find interesting too. And I just want to kind of keep trying to draw some parallels back to helicopters.
Yes.
Is I can understand that situation that you're in because, as you said, a very hierarchy of decision making, meaning there's someone above you that is ultimately really charged with making the decisions.
Yes.
Kind of what we would call that PIC, that pilot in command. And there has been a lot of incidents and accidents where an SIC, a second in command, didn't feel empowered to say something.
Yes.
In fact, earlier I talked about the power lines and how helicopters hit power lines all the time. You talk to the linemen, the guys that are professionals and understanding how lines work and they're inspecting the lines. If you talk to a lineman that's been in a wire strike, the chances are they saw the wire. They were afraid to speak up to offend the PIC.
Yes.
They just assumed that pilot saw the wire. And so there's been a big push in flying in the wire environment. If you see something, say something.
Yes.
Essentially. air medical used to kill a lot of people, flight crew members, I should say, really specifically. It was a very dangerous industry. And one of the reasons for that is you had PICs, pilot in commands, that were the judge, they were the sheriff, they were everything, right? They made the decisions. No one else in that helicopter had any decision-making authority. And one of the many changes, but one of the most important changes that was made in air medical is this idea of what we call a 51% rule. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's this idea that everyone in that helicopter has 51% of power at any given time. So even though I'm the pilot and I'm really in charge of flying the helicopter and I understand the safety of the helicopter, if I'm doing something or we're about to go fly in weather that maybe a crew member is uncomfortable with, that nurse can say, hey, look, 51%, I'm not flying, right? They can have that power. And at that time, it's a no-go. It's a non-starter.
I love that.
Now, the caveat to that is if you get to a 51% situation, I think you've already gone too far.
Yes.
And I want to parlay back into this idea of briefing. So when I worked air medical, it was very easy. You flew with the same crew almost every day. You're doing the same routes. You're flying in the same nice sunny Texas weather. Not always so much to report. And it was really easy to get lazy with those briefs. And I found that crews that got lazy with those briefs would often end up making mistakes, or those might be situations where someone would truly get 51% it. I use those briefings as a tool of being able to connect with my crew that day and make sure that they understood everything. Hey guys, today is a hazy day. And so when we're flying today, that haze is actually going to make that visibility look worse than it is. And based on my experience, here's going to be my level of comfort. And if I start to see something, anything different, I'm going to turn around. But at any time, if you're not comfortable, tell me, I'll turn around, right? Always giving them that power.
Yes.
And to me, that was so invaluable. And so that day, missing that meeting or not doing that meeting, having your management, so to speak, choose not to do that meeting, I think that's really that first misstep in that Swiss cheese, right?
Yes.
So it's very interesting to hear this, and there's so many parallels to what we discover or what we see in aviation. So
thank you to our sponsor, Instrom Helicopter Corporation. Instrom Helicopter Corporation welcomes the new 480B Elite to its fleet, fully loaded with all the top-of-the-line features, including Garmin G500H, electric air conditioning, Genesis 3-axis autopilot, exclusive paint and interior, and more. 2025 delivery dates are available, but opportunities are limited. Secure your spot at instromhelicopter.com.
Well, it's a dear friend of mine describes it like this: hierarchies lead to chaos, but they're the only way out of chaos. So we often misapply hierarchies. They're really designed well for chaotic situations where you have to take, kind of important action, and there isn't time to, it's time sensitive. Whereas if we're using a hierarchy in a non-critical situation, we do have the time to have conversations, to have other inputs, and all of those things. And the ethics of making a decision that impacts other people is important to consider, right? Like if I'm at the top of a hierarchy and I'm pushing my own agenda and other people are going to suffer consequence from it, then the ethics of that are questionable. If we're all exposed to consequence, then it makes sense that we all have voice. Now, it's not like, you're going to be able to use that in, kind of commercial aviation from the standpoint of 250 people on an aircraft.
Sure.
But people can still choose not to go in those instances, and that's important. But what's interesting is that we often don't think that how important that is to use that 51%, to use our voice. And there's two ways to diffuse a hierarchy: is as a pilot or a leader of other people. We make the invitation, right? Like you just described. And then the second way is to step up, right? To claim, our 51%. And that's really important. And that actually requires courage.
It's very hard.
Yeah. Super difficult, like incredibly difficult, especially in some situations, because there may be, kind of profound social consequence.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And what the problem is you don't always know the positive outcome either, right?
Right.
Like, meaning that if you would have said something that day, we would have never known, like there would have never been that avalanche, but no one would have actually ever known that, right?
Right.
So like it almost kind of reinforces like, oh, you worry wart, or this idea. And it's very hard to speak up. Interestingly enough, I got so lucky, Ken, when I was a young pilot, I sat next to this older pilot. I was flying on just a Alaska plane or a, normal commercial airplane from California up to Oregon. And I sat, ironically enough, to a high time pilot. He flew for the city of San Diego, doing rescue and doing complex missions and everything. And I was like 2 weeks into helicopter flight school. And I asked him, I said, what's the greatest advice that you can give me to be successful in helicopters? And he said, the best advice I can give you is learn how to say no. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I was like, man, I don't really know what that means, And so I asked, I said, well, what do you mean say no? And he goes, you are going to be presented with a lot of situations. And now, granted, he came up during a different time where there was a lot more mission pressure. My industry is better than the industry was when he was coming up. So I've had to say no less. But, essentially this idea of, hey, look, if you don't want to do something, say no, right? If you're not comfortable flying, right? That Kobe Bryant incident, if that pilot would have just told Kobe no that day, the world would still have Kobe Bryant. Mm-hmm. The helicopter industry would be a lot better.
Yeah.
Because that pilot would have just said no, right? Always saying no, there's always this mission pressure, whether it's flying a superstar like Kobe or flying air medical. If I say no, there could be a child that's going to die.
Yes.
Well, the alternative is if I don't say no, there's a child that's going to die and likely 3 other adults in the helicopter are also going to die. And so it's this really interesting dichotomy of being able to say no and actually being comfortable with the consequence of saying no.
Yeah, and that requires the same level of courage as being able to know when to say yes. Right? Like, there's kind of this pair of opposites. One is saying yes, and I would never say that we shouldn't be doing amazing things, in the air or on the sides of mountains. I would never say that because I think that that's one of the things that kind of allows us to kind of reach our potential as humans. But at the same time, being sensitive enough and wise enough to know when to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hard part, right? Like we think that, this heroic image that we have in our mind's eye that so many movies and television shows reinforce, like, Mission Impossible, things like impossible odds, and they always pull through, right? Like,
yeah, of course.
We get reinforced with kind of that vision, but that's not a true depiction of reality. True depiction of reality is that, yeah, I could end up in catastrophe here. And so is there a path where I can see that I get to stay within kind of my own kind of risk tolerance and do this, right? And do this effectively. And where is the tipping point, right? Like, where is the tipping point? And that sensitivity to kind of the tipping point from kind of adventure to disaster. I think as humans, we love being there, right? Like, we love being in that place where it's really a flow experience where we're using all of our skills and all of our training and all of the things because we can do amazing things as humans.
Mm-hmm.
And so we should allow ourselves to be able to do amazing things, but at the same time, never abandon the sensitivity to, okay, I have this sense that things are going to tip into this dark arena that I don't want to go into.
100%.
I love, this is a fixed wing story, but I love the story of the Gimli glider.
I'm not familiar.
Okay, so it was in the 1980s, and in Canada we were just shifting from imperial to metric, and so the aircraft was loaded with exactly half the fuel that it needed. It was supposed to be getting kilograms of fuel, and it ended up being loaded with pounds of fuel.
Okay, yep, that's a problem.
So they're flying from Montreal to Edmonton, and exactly halfway at 28,000 feet, brand new 767 aircraft is now a glider. And so the pilot was too far from Winnipeg to land, and just slightly too close to this decommissioned military airport called Gimli. And he used a glider pilot's technique of kind of sliding the aircraft, to dump elevation.
Yep.
And he did it in a 767. Right, so
Crazy.
He broke the rules. He used his kind of weekend glider pilot's knowledge.
Sure.
And it, could have gone sideways if he didn't know what he was doing, but he knew what he was doing. He was well trained at the technique, and it definitely alarmed his passengers. But, it's a beautiful story because he was able to kind of realize his potential. And, afterwards, in an interview, he said, the rest of my career was a cruise because I was always curious how I'd respond in an emergency. And I now knew that I was going to respond well in an emergency. And it's a beautiful story. It's an incredible story of having the courage to do the right thing at the right time. And maybe it's breaking the rules, but that's the important part. That's why we still have humans at the controls, is that we're able to go to that place that has never been done before.
Well, at least for the FAA, 91.3, I think it is, in our regulations, essentially gives pilots the right to make the PIC decision, right? So you can do anything that you want in an aircraft to meet the extent of an emergency.
Yes.
Even if that means essentially that you're breaking other rules, right? Because an emergency is an emergency. Yeah. And then you have to rely on the training that you have. And sometimes that training when I'm in a helicopter and I'm experiencing a failure of some sort, maybe I'm not communicating to ATC as much because I'm just focused on flying. That's technically breaking the rules, but I'm doing what it is to meet the extent of the emergency. I do want to talk about your business, Archetypal.
Yeah.
And maybe I have it wrong. And so if this is a poor analogy or a bad segue, I apologize in advance. But when I think of like these ideas of archetypes of people,
yes,
I relate it back to our 5 hazardous attitudes that we have in aviation.
Yeah.
They're drilled into us from our early flight school days, but they're always breezed over.
Right.
Even as a flight instructor, I fell into the trap of being like, all right, there's 5 hazardous attitudes, right? You can be macho, you can have resignation, and I didn't think that they were that important. And then you go into your career and you start flying and there's a little less oversight. You start to make decisions based on information that's presented to you. And you start to realize, man, those little hazardous attitudes that the FAA came up with are real.
Yeah.
They really are real. And then you read accident reports or you have friends that are in incidents or accidents, and you see that, man, a lot of the time the pilot had some type of hazardous attitude in that situation.
Yeah.
And so you came up with this idea of archetypes of,
yes.
And I guess I'm trying to segue into that, right, of what that really means and how you have applied this to this human factors, business and mission that you're now on.
Yeah. So I have 16 archetypes, and there's too many to kind of unpack at the moment, but I'll unpack one. And, the first one is, and I present them in pairs, Halsey. And the reason why I present them in pairs is that, the biggest challenge that we have as humans is that we don't want to identify ourselves as being the one that has the problem. It's super easy to look at case studies and kind of unpack, what other people have done. That's like, it's totally simple. But the trick of it all is that when we're looking at case studies, imagine ourselves doing exactly the same thing that the people involved in the incident are doing. And that's where it becomes educative. And so the archetypes, the first pair that I'll unpack for us is the pair between the addict and the alchemist. That's a tension between those two. And so the addict is, in our mind's eye, we might think of somebody on the street in downtown that, is struggling with fentanyl. And so that's where our mind goes, is that we try to distance ourselves as far as possible from kind of the idea of being an addict. But when we bring it close, we might be able to say, as a ski guide, I'm addicted to making sure that my clients get powder snow.
Oh, yeah.
Or as a pilot, I'm totally addicted to getting my clients to their destination, right? And we can have those kinds of addiction. But that energy of, being addicted to something, it can be a good thing when we balance it with, kind of the alchemist, where we are aware, like, I love getting my clients to their destination. I absolutely love that. And today we need to come up with a different plan. That's the alchemist, right? Like where we can take a situation and we need to make it into something different. And so when we alchemize, kind of an addictive behavior, we then change it so that it elevates to become something kind of that we're more aware of and that we can actually use the power of. In some situations, it's good. We call them good habits, right? It's a good habit to try to get to your clients to have powder snow, and it's a good habit to, get your passengers to their destination. But it's also, it tips into something destructive when we must get them to, as opposed to our primary directive is to remain safe, right? Like to be free from harm. And after that, if we can get to our destination, or if we can deliver powder turns, we're golden. Those two archetypes, the addict and the alchemist, they're just awarenesses of how we're showing up to the situation. Now, what are the mindsets of the two? The addict's mindset is deny. Oh, it'll be fine. It won't happen to me. All of those different things that we, as humans, kind of can drop into. It'll be fine, right? So those are the mindsets, and that's the mindset of the addict. And the mindset of the alchemist is, acceptance. Okay, the situation is now bigger than me. I need to navigate that challenge, right? And it might mean that the people that I need to fly to their destination, well, they actually have to wait until tomorrow, or we ski 20-degree slopes for the day, right? If we need to alchemize or change and accept the current reality, and then actually come up with a plan for that current reality. And the reason, Halsey, why these tools are important, and again, it gives us a resolution to understanding how we're showing up to kind of really important situations, and gives us a language. I'll drop in a little bit into faint-heartedness and courage. Like you mentioned, kind of the five things that were given to you about kind of mindsets that that you need to be aware of. One of the mindsets was kind of resignation that you mentioned, and I'm in my tools I call that faint-heartedness, right? Like I might be afraid to speak up, or afraid to challenge the status quo, or afraid to have the difficult conversation, or afraid to share my opinion, and the journey that I, as a human, want to go on is to elevate to being heroic or courageous. And the hero archetype that's courageous. And the hero archetype is courageous in service of others. And so, we never want to lose our fear because fear keeps us honest. But we also want to be courageous, but we don't want to be too courageous. So the sweet spot is right in the middle between fear and courage.
Yeah, totally.
And I love that because fear does keep us honest, right? Like it's the thing that heightens our awareness. It brings color to the situation. It adds nuance because it's something that has been gifted to us through millennia to help us make good decisions. Now, when we let fear take over, that's when we start doing, really terrible things. So we need to kind of ladder up to being more heroic and courageous, showing up more courageously and finding that sweet spot, right, between fear and courage, so that we can do the thing effectively.
My question on that, and I love that, by the way, and I'm curious on how you do this in mountaineering, and I'm sure because it can draw back to being a pilot, is that for a very long time in your career, in the beginning of your career especially, you're actually a little bit safer because I think you have a higher fear, right? You're a little more cognizant, and that fear is based on just a lack of really experience, right? And then you actually hit a spot in your career where that fear starts to dissipate.
Yes.
Because you've seen a couple of things, you've experienced a couple of things, you've had a lot of flying that's been very uneventful, right? I've spent the majority of my flying life in a helicopter that's moving straight and level and nothing is happening, right? That's 99% of my experience in a helicopter. And you start to get this complacency. That fear essentially kind of goes away.
Yes.
And then that's when you kind of get bit.
Yes.
Something goes wrong, you're not ready to react, or you make a bad decision because you've made that same decision several times without consequence. And so you're almost numb to it. So in your line of work, how do you balance that complacency and kind of always keep that fear alive without letting it kind of overtake it so you're not so scared to go and do what you have to do to make a living?
As always, a special thanks to HeliCASTS for producing this podcast. Specializing in helicopter evaluations, faster sales, and superb service, HeliCASTS is the go-to agency for clients expecting immediate results. HeliCASTS' team of helicopter professionals are the best in the business. Using their aviation expertise, a nationwide network, and a proprietary 76-step listing strategy, HeliCASTS will convert your listing from Mayday to payday. Ready to get started? Text helicopter to 1-855-HeliCASTS. That's helicopter to 1-855-735-5226. And a helicopter pilot agent will reach out. HeliCASTS. List it, sell it, done.
Yeah, and I think that what serves us best is to never forget consequence. Having the ability to ask ourselves in the morning, what's the worst thing that could happen today? Okay, so the worst thing that could happen today is that, we crash our aircraft or we get caught in an avalanche. And then we reverse engineer. So we start out with kind of the worst case scenario, and that actually brings us to the reality of what we're doing. We're still engaged in a hazardous pursuit, even though we're habituated to it. So to break the habituation, allowing ourselves to go to the worst case scenario and then reverse engineer from there. It's interesting that you say that, Halsey, because when you map out an avalanche professional's career, it does exactly what you described, right? Like they start out, they're very conservative. They gain confidence, and then they gain too much confidence, have an accident or incident or a near miss, and then they drop back down. And it just, and that cycle repeats through
it's the same
30-year career. And that's been mapped out. And that's the parallel across industries is the human condition. I had there's a friend of mine who worked as a park warden in Canada in Banff National Park. And he would get long lined into the side of a mountain cliff to do rescues. And the second that he would get there, he'd be looking around and going, "Oh my God, like this is incredibly dangerous. The rock fall, there's, it's warming up. The cornice is going to collapse on us. This is like crazy." And within 5 minutes, he's habituated to it. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this will be fine.
It's crazy.
And it's amazing. And the benefit of that is that we're adaptable. But your question's a good one, because how do we bring ourselves back to the awareness of consequence? And that's a continual practice.
Yeah. What I tell people is you have to always kind of have a mindset of, why you're doing what you're doing, and, take it outside of flying, and so for me, I always looked at it like, well, first and foremost, I don't personally want to die. So that's factor one of being a better pilot today and making good decisions. And I think as you get older, that fear actually of death, for me at least, has become more announced. I don't know why. I think as a youngster, I didn't care. It's funny. Now I feel like I have more to lose, I guess. And so I think death does drive me. And then I look at things like,
How were you when you got your pilot's license?
how old was
Yeah.
I? 18.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, young.
There was actually part of your brain that wasn't developed.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. I mean, look, I look back at my flying career, Ken, and I look at what I was doing as a teaching, I ended up teaching at the flight school for a long time, which was awesome. It was a great benefit. But I was, 19, 20, 21 years old teaching, very advanced maneuvers and helicopters that were very unforgiving. Low inertia rotor systems, and doing a ton of full down auto rotations and different configurations of auto rotations. And I look back and I'm like, I would not do that today. I would be way too scared. And it's kind of funny how that happens. But I always just try to remember when I'm flying, like, I guess what I'm addicted to now, Ken, is like not killing myself or anyone else. And I take that really seriously.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm probably kind of on the far side now. I don't fly full time anymore.
Yeah.
My business for the last 6 years has been buying and selling helicopters. So now when I fly, I'm so overly cautious because I'm not recent, right?
Yeah.
That recency is so important that I'm almost like, it's that kind of fear and anxiety around flying is actually more than it's been, just because I don't have that recency. So I'm actually trying to work through that right now. I want to do more flying.
Yeah.
I want to get more comfortable again. I just had my first child. I have a beautiful little daughter.
Oh.
In fact, you might have heard her cry a couple of times during today's episode. I apologize if you did. That's a new hurdle for me to overcome. Like this idea of like, I want to live in a bubble now so I can be there for her forever, even at the detriment of doing what I love.
Yes.
And so there's weird things that you have to navigate. I think right now I'm on the far side of the pendulum where I'm almost too afraid, if that makes sense. And I need to bring myself back into this area. So it's actually something I'm actively working on right now. And I haven't really talked about it on the podcast because I host a helicopter podcast. I shouldn't be afraid to fly helicopters.
But it's interesting because you're talking about something that I think that I suspect a lot of pilots grapple with, right? Like even if they're away from it for a little while, it's likely something that is challenging, because I think that when we've been away from it and we come back to it, climbing was always that way for me. The consequence is just more vivid. And so, yeah, of course we're going to be a little bit more scary.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like, because of that lack of recency, it's just given me more time to think about all the bad things that could happen, I guess. And in my career, I've lost a lot of friends. I've had a lot of friends that have crashed helicopters and died. I've had friends that have died and had little young kids. One of my buddies, his kid is 18 years old now, and he died when his kid was 1. And so he's missed that entire thing. And so I think that weighs heavy on me.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. It's kind of I'm in a pivotal moment right now, I think, in kind of my helicopter journey, honestly. And I am grappling with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned love of flying. And, what I think, one of the parallels that I see between kind of being a mountaineer and working as a mountain professional and being a pilot is that we love what we do. And one of the reasons why we love what we do is that it demands the best from us. And I actually think that working in high consequence or high potential consequence environments is really important for humanity right now. And the reason why I believe that is that we need more than ever to be engaged with things that are real and have real consequence. Because the levers and the tools that we've created for ourselves can be a hazard to ourselves when we don't understand consequence, right?
Sure.
And so one of the things that is beautiful about flying and mountaineering is that the consequence is real. And so there's an opportunity to gain a lot of humility from what we do, but also a lot of confidence. I wouldn't be the man that I am if it wasn't for the mountains. And you would not be the man you are if it wasn't for flying.
100%.
And listening to you speak to your concern about your daughter and wanting to be there for her, like that, to me, with my lens, it looks like flying has taught you that, right? Like, it's like you want to get to the destination with your daughter.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a shift, right? Like, flying makes me happy and I love flying. But now I'm also in a place where I don't have to fly necessarily because I have a career that's outside of flying that pays the bills.
Yes.
And so now I almost kind of feel like my new path is being a father, and
that's awesome.
But I also don't want to lose myself in that, right? I think that it's okay to be selfless as a father. I think that that's probably makes a good father. You have to make decisions. I'm guessing in mountaineering, there's a lot of individuals that really push hard in the mountains.
Yes.
And then they get married and they have a kid and there's a change, right? Yes. There's a change in what you're willing to climb or what you're willing to do. And I'm just in that change right now. And I don't necessarily know how I feel about it, good or bad.
Right.
It's just where I am. It's just like that moment of life. And I love helicopters at the end of the day. They're the most incredible machines. I think you said earlier on about people doing amazing things. And I am so impressed. I think we live in a society where it's so easy, especially right now, right? The temperature, I think that's been the word this week, temperature. The temperature's high. People they hate each other. You're either celebrating a death or you're sad about a death. It's all this really tense stuff right now.
Yeah.
And it's easy to hate people. And I'm opposite of that, man. I think people are incredible. What we have done when I look at a helicopter, I am amazed. Anytime I'm in a helicopter, I'm like, I cannot believe humans made this.
Yes.
The human ingenuity to put these pieces together and somehow make it work is way above my pay grade. But I'm thankful for that, and I think it takes, humans are incredible.
Yeah.
And think about it on the mountaineering side. I think that's why I love listening to those books. I love this idea of hearing about how some humans have this innate ability to find that edge and teeter that edge, and I think mountaineering especially. I mean, I would say mountaineering is far more dangerous than flying helicopters because you really are teetering the edge. It seems like you have to find that fine line. And so it's really, there's so many parallels to take. And I think it's really neat. Ken, this is one of the most fun episodes I've had. So thank you.
Well, I think we can find that edge when we make whatever we do, flying or mountaineering, when we make it about our own development. And when we do that, you mentioned the helicopter and how amazing it is. It was developed because people allowed the best version of themselves to show up.
Totally.
When they did their work. And so what we do is a product of who we are. And so when we focus on who we are as people, we become the best version of ourselves. And we then elevate into being a great alpinist or a great pilot. And, balancing humility with courage or whatever it may be. And so I'm really honored to have been here on your podcast, Halsey. And
yeah, it's so cool. It's I occasionally I'll have an off helicopter person, and I think that this one really takes the cake for so much synergy in between the two industries. And I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think you're writing about these things now in aviation publications, right? That's how we got connected, was through, Vertical. And I think you're working with, is it Jen?
Yeah, Jen,
Jen Boyer?
and I've done some with CHC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think that I hope, for me personally, it's really fun to learn from other people that aren't actually in your industry, because I think your story is a little more captivating when it's outside of what you do all the time. So for a pilot to hear your story of an avalanche, it's actually the same story that we hear every day, Ken, about these horrific accidents that we have in helicopters. But it's different in the sense that it's not anything to do with a helicopter.
Right.
Other than a helicopter took you there and picked you up.
Yeah.
And I think that actually allows for greater learning, because then it really, it captivates the audience, right? So I think it's really neat that you're willing to share your experience. You're willing to be vulnerable even, go out there and point out the mistakes that were made, not just by the hierarchy, but you even had reservations and you went against your gut and all these things.
Oh yeah.
And now, and so to be able to highlight that your humility is going to save lives. It already has, I'm sure it's done that in mountaineering. And I hope in the other industries that you touch, your education will save lives. And so I hope this conversation today has influenced someone. Ken, again, this is so fun. To MHM Publishing, thank you guys for allowing me to have this platform. And thanks for letting me interview who I want to interview. In this case, this is not a helicopter person, but you guys see the importance of this type of conversation, specifically when it comes to human factors in aviation. And I think that's really neat. So kudos to MHM Publishing for actually putting this together.
Yes.
I should check my MHM Publishing email more. I left Ken hanging for like a month and a half. So I apologize on that, Ken. I don't actually even have that email set up. I just run everything through my one email. And so I appreciate your patience. So glad you're on. To our audience, couldn't do this show without you guys. And of course, to our sponsors who give us some back end to be able to produce and direct and do all this is just incredible. So Ken, thank you again. If someone is interested in checking out your book, Buried, where's the best place to go and find that?
Buried, you can find on Amazon. You can get it off of Amazon or Rocky Mountain Books. And you can also find me at archetypal.ca. And I run all kinds of courses, and both in person and online, or even hazard management.
Yeah, I love that. Check Ken out, and living through his experience, and then all the cool things that he's now teaching in it. So Ken, I think there's more to talk about. I think we'll just have to have you on for a second show in the future to dive even deeper into this. What do you think?
That sounds great.
Awesome. Hey, thanks guys. Ken, don't hang up. To our listeners, we'll catch you next time.
All right. Take care.
Please stay tuned for a final word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, HeliLadder. Enhance your fall protection and maintenance efficiency with HeliLadder, the industry standard of ladder workstands. The iconic orange MX5 system is fully modular and compatible with countless aircraft models for any type of operation, making you money by preventing accidents and reducing maintenance errors. For a free quote and special discounts, visit heliladder.com. Focus on your work, not your balance. Thank you to our sponsor, Instrom Helicopter Corporation. Instrom Helicopter Corporation welcomes the new 480B Elite to its fleet, fully loaded with all the top-of-the-line features, including Garmin G500H, electric air conditioning, Genesis 3-axis autopilot, exclusive paint and interior, and more. 2025 delivery dates are available, but opportunities are limited. Secure your spot at instromhelicopter.com.
As always, a special thanks to HeliCASTS for producing this podcast. Specializing in helicopter evaluations, faster sales, and superb service, HeliCASTS is the go-to agency for clients expecting immediate results. HeliCASTS' team of helicopter professionals are the best in the business. Using their aviation expertise, a nationwide network, and a proprietary 76-step listing strategy, HeliCASTS will convert your listing from Mayday to payday. Ready to get started? Text helicopter to 1-855-HeliCASTS. That's helicopter to 1-855-735-5226. And a HeliCASTS pilot agent will reach out. HeliCASTS. List it, sell it, done.